Welcome to the HMO Property Show, by investors for investors. Brought to you by the HMO Property Co, Australia's leaders in impact investing. Investments made with the intention to generate a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a positive financial return. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing.
Hey guys, welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host Neil Gibb, and today, because data is king, we have brought on the Data King. It's Mr. Grant Dusting from McCrindle. Welcome, Grant.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming down. I know you're a busy man. I'd love to talk about data, because data informs the decisions we make as property developers and investors to make sound decisions moving forward and hopefully build wealth and cash flow from our investments. And obviously the ABS, I've just brought out all their new data, and I watched an incredible webinar from McCrindle, and I was like, wow, this is really, really good. I need to get these guys on the podcast. So here we are.
Well, great you found it helpful. Always love hearing that.
And it's good that you're based in Perth as well.
Yeah, so we started a Perth office 2 years ago. Our head office is in Sydney. And I think in this kind of hybrid working era, remote working, flexible working, it's been really nice. I'm still working with a lot of clients nationally, but growing a team here in Perth. And you're speaking my language with your comments before about using data to inform decisions. And really that's what we do at McCrindle. It's about... So we use the term a social research insights agency. So it's social research, understanding social trends, how society's changing, how people are changing, and what does that mean for business leaders and people leading communities and organisations making decisions about the future and having the best data at their disposal.
Yeah, because the way we used to live compared to the way we live now and the way we're going to live in the future, three totally different things, aren't there?
It's crazy how rapidly things are changing. And I think we tell people we're studying social trends and change. And boy, we're kept on our toes, and particularly through the last few years with COVID, it's really, the pace of change is accelerating. So I think a lot of the business leaders we speak to, they're just really trying to grapple with how much change is happening and disruption after disruption. So yeah, that's really what we deal in. Yeah.
And as a director of strategy for McCrindle, what's your role entail?
Yeah, so it's pretty varied, which keeps things exciting. So really for me, the focus is twofold. One is for people, we do a lot of research, so commissioned research. So people come to us as a consultancy to say, hey, we want to understand these people groups better, maybe their customers, maybe their stakeholders, the general market, or a particular persona or segment. And so they might commission us to do research for them. And so my role is focused on starting with those business problems, thinking, what do we want to know? What's the business problem? And then working backwards to go, okay, so what data do we need to have to answer those questions and to give that guidance? So it's really designing a suitable research methodology, understanding, are we talking demographic data from the ABS, which you've mentioned before, or are we talking focus groups, speaking to people, running surveys? So really that's my main focus, working with clients there. And then as well, just being out and about sharing our research. A lot of people want to come and share some of those top trends, and it might be at a conference or an industry event or a staff event or a board strategy day. So being able to advise leaders in that way, those are kind of my two focus areas.
Yeah, beautiful. And there was a release that you brought out probably about 12 to 18 months ago, and it was the change in Perth.
Yes, the Future of Perth report.
Yes, yep. Incredible. Loved it.
Great to hear.
Yeah, like I can't believe it was a free download as well. It was incredible, really, really thorough with some really good insights, and kind of that led me into watching the webinar when the ABS release came out, and obviously led to us talking here as well, which is incredible.
Yeah, so people can still search that. We might have actually now recently made that paid actually, so some people might be disappointed, but you got in early, so you're welcome to share that with people. But yeah, I think for us it's those kind of pieces where no one's commissioning us to do it. We just say, actually, this is important. We want to help equip leaders, and really it's just pulling together data that we might have collected ourselves, and also other data that's out there, but just pulling it together in a coherent fashion for people. We operate on the assumption that most people are not interested in reading long, boring, dense reports, 50 or 500 pages long. So for us, it's about how can we get those 2-page, 10-page summaries, really the key headlines, the key grabs for leaders who are time poor.
Yep. Brilliant, love it. So let's get into some of the what's going on out there,
Yeah,
because people are going to love these stats that we're going to share with them. So what's the biggest changes Perth's experiencing right now in terms of population growth?
Well, it's been a really interesting time the last few years. So we'll talk about COVID in a second, but even just taking a step back, I think as someone who's grown up in Perth and Australia, population growth, it's so second nature to us. It's kind of the default that sometimes we forget that that's not the case everywhere. So Perth and Australia have been growing rapidly. So I think that's the first point. Perth's population has been growing strong. We've recently ticked over the 2.1 million mark in terms of Perth, and that's actually 400,000 more people in the last decade alone. So as a city, we've added 400,000 people. We're growing. Obviously, that impacts housing, demand and supply. So that's probably the first point. And being the one of the unique things which you would be very familiar with about Perth, dealing in property, is that we're a sprawling city.
Yes.
So we've got this north and south sprawl. So those kind of growth hotspots, it wouldn't be a surprise to listeners to hear that the fastest growing areas in the last decade, places like Alkimos in the north, Baldivis, Wellard in the south.
Yep.
Then in the southeast, you've got the growth corridor around PR Waters, Harrisdale, even out to Byford. And then in the northeast, places like Ellenbrook and Averley, that's where the growth has been happening. So really it's all in the outer urban areas, the suburbs, where the families are moving in. That's where the growth's been happening.
Yep. And the growth is happening because there's so much urban sprawl there as well. So when we talk about growth, we're talking about the actual growth of the suburb itself, the sprawl of that suburb.
Yeah, population growth. So just more and more people moving in.
Yep.
That's really been the story of Perth over the last few decades. COVID has been a blip on that for Australia. I mean, Australia as a whole, really we're a nation that relies on migration for our growth. When you look at the last few decades, the birth rate keeps declining. So really what's been powering our population growth has been that overseas migration. And then all of a sudden 2020, the migration tap gets turned off, and it's kind of, I think for Australia, the last time we saw we didn't have net migration was back to the Great Depression, kind of around the World War I, World War II. So really these are, I hate to use that word, unprecedented, but in terms of the changes recently, COVID has thrown a spanner in the works there, and that's in some ways that's given Australian cities a chance to catch up with infrastructure. And this is particularly true of the larger cities, Melbourne and Sydney, where they were just really struggling to keep up with population growth. Perth to a lesser extent, but still we see projects like Metronet, etc. Really, the last few years has been a big push there, and really we're playing catch up.
Yeah. And when the migration tap got turned off, that was probably a good time for us to catch up with the lack of housing that we've got. But the government had a really good idea to stimulate the economy with grants, which caused more chaos than anything else, didn't it?
Well, hindsight's 2020, isn't it? And look, I don't envy being the Prime Minister or Treasurer at that time. But yes, they made some decisions, and it's had some unintended consequences. And I think particularly, we all know people who are in that place of either trying to build or have those kind of horror stories at the moment of just having to wait, and kind of those indefinite periods of just, builders are just under the pump or going bust, and it's a tricky time.
It is. I think they refer to it as a profitless boom.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yep.
How is the demographic of the population changing? Are you seeing a change in that with the stats that we've got access to?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're not only growing as a city and as a nation, but we're also changing. So for Perth is an incredibly multicultural city, and the fact that 2 in 5 Perth residents are born overseas. So if you were to walk up to 5 people on the street at random, chances are 2 of those people are going to be born overseas. And that puts Perth on par with we often would hold up, say, Melbourne or Sydney as multicultural cosmopolitan cities, but that puts us on par with Melbourne and not far behind Sydney. So when you think of a multicultural cosmopolitan city, maybe you don't always think of Perth, but you should. We're incredibly multicultural, and that's really a lot of the growth is, again, from migration. And so the last few years, that's been the big story, that particularly from Southeast Asian countries, say Singapore, Malaysia, even into other parts of Asia, India and China, a lot of the growth has come, population, so the migration has come from those areas. And so that changes the community dynamics. And when it comes to households and these different cultures coming in, they bring different social norms around housing, families living together, multi-generational households, younger people staying at home longer. We know that generally Asian families, it's more common for the young people to stay at home longer. It's just more of a social norm. So that has implications for housing demand and supply.
Yeah. And what I've also noticed as well, and I could be wrong here, but it's just a observation from my part, is we tend to see a lot of the same nationality sort of magnetised to one area. Like the English seem to populate the Rockingham or northern suburbs. We see a lot of Indians
anywhere
around.
by the sea, I think, or where the sun for the British. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and we get to see these different sort of nationalities sort of all end up in the same sort of areas as well. Is that a thing? Are you seeing that too?
I think that's part of human nature, is to look for the familiar. So that is definitely true of Perth, as with any capital city.
Yeah.
What I like about Perth is I think by kind of global standards, we do a pretty good job of being a bit more integrated. So I lived in Sydney for a few years, and this was a lot more stark to me in Sydney, that really you do have suburbs where literally from one suburb to the next, this is the Vietnamese suburb, this is the Lebanese suburb, and walking around the local shops and malls, there weren't signs in English. So we don't quite have it to that extent in Perth. I think we've done a bit better job of being a bit more integrated. But yes, that is often the case, and human nature, people look for those established networks.
Yes, like attracts like.
Yep, that's it.
And how is the dynamics changing for the housing as well? Like, are we seeing different nationalities live in different styles of housing? Like, does a certain nationality like a smaller house or a bigger house, or you've touched on multi-generational there as well? Yeah,
so there's really two components to the demographic change. So we've mentioned the cultural diversity there and our multiculturalism. I think that's a real strength I see of Perth. And so, yes, that has implications for the housing. Like I've mentioned there, families who might be more used to living together, maybe even co-living with other families, if like cousins or extended family, that's a bit more of the done thing in some cultures. The other key change is just with the aging population and the implications there. So we're growing, we're more culturally diverse, but also we're aging. So we've got more people in those retirement years, but also with longer life expectancies and higher cost of living. Whereas in the past you might have taken the pension or retired at, say, 60, and then life expectancy, you might have had 15 years expected to live. Now that's pushing into the late 80s, into the 90s. So people, it's a lot harder to survive for 30 years on X amount of money. You've got to make that money stretch longer. So we're seeing people actually working longer, and therefore if they're kind of not going from full-time work straight into retirement, they're kind of downsizing or down aging, if you like. So it might be a gradual entry into retirement. So that means that if someone's still working in their 60s into their 70s, chances are they're not actually really looking for that residential aged care living. They're looking to live in their home and age in place. And so that's really a key trend that we're seeing with older Australians, and there's more of them and a greater proportion of the population. So that's a real big issue now for housing, is how to navigate the expectations of the baby boomers, who are the retiree generation now, and what they're actually wanting for their twilight years. Yeah, because the baby boomers were the biggest cohort of biggest age demographic that we had at one point, but that's changed now, hasn't it? Well, you were definitely listening to our webinar, Neil, so yes, kudos there. So yeah, I mean, the baby boomers, as the name suggests, really they've got that name because post World War II, there was that kind of optimism, and there a lot of families were having babies and felt optimistic about the world. So as a generation, they have been the largest generation as a cohort. But at least in Australia, just in the last census, we've seen the Gen Y or the millennials just take on that baton of actually the largest generation in terms of the population. So in terms of their influence and purchasing power, still baby boomers have those assets that they've accumulated over their lifetime. But in terms of raw numbers, the Gen Y, the millennials now, they're the ones in their 40s and 30s forming families and in their kind of key peak working earning years as well. So they're really the consumer powerhouse now.
Yeah. And is the way the baby boomers used to live and the way that the Gen Ys are living now, is that changed in any way?
Oh, it continues to change.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've just mentioned then, that what we're seeing already is with the new expectations about what they want in retirement, and the government's got stats on just really the investment in in-home care, so not the residential, like nursing home, residential aged care, but people wanting to age in their own home with that comfort and familiarity in the lifestyle. That's big. So really, it's those twilight years are really now people wanting that lifestyle, and they want that amenity from where they're living. So we're talking with developers on the East Coast who are really looking at vertical communities, even for these kind of retirement living homes, where it doesn't feel like a retirement village. It feels more like a place that I would live in, someone in their 30s, really vibrant. There's shops on the ground floor and amenities and open space. So that's already happening. And I think particularly in places like Sydney and Melbourne, there's developers looking at that. And I think Perth's usually a couple of years behind some of these places. So that's something to watch in Perth as well. And
we think about the baby boomers as well, that their kind of philosophy in life was find a partner early, get married, have kids, grow up in the house, the small house on the big block with a big back garden. But the Gen Ys do it a little bit differently, don't they? Yeah,
so that's been something we've really been watching too. So there's quite a lot we could talk about here. One, yes, as you said, life stages. So traditionally it was you get married, settle down, have kids, and career was in there, but really it was the family things were the driving force. And yeah, that might have been true 30, 40 years ago, but now people are much more, say, career driven. So they're prioritizing, and women prioritizing their career in their 20s and 30s, and then naturally delaying those other life markers, if they even do them at all, like settling down and having kids. So, I mean, the fastest growing household type in Perth and in Australia is the single person household. So people are either not getting married or not entering those relationships at all, or if they are, they're delaying them into their 30s, into their mid-30s or late 30s. Yep. And so that's been a key trend we've observed in recent years.
It's an interesting trend there as well. Interesting stat that that's the fastest growing style of housing as well. What about the Gen X's? Different altogether.
Yeah, sometimes nicknamed the forgotten generation or the sandwich generation, because we hear a lot about the baby boomers and then the Gen Ys or the millennials, but Gen X is sandwiched in between. So yeah, I think the Gen Xers are in this life stage now where they're often caring up and down. So they're caring up for their parents who are entering those retirement years, but often caring down as well. They might be grandparents themselves if they've got kind of millennial kids who've just started having their own families. They're now being asked to play the grandparent carer role as well. So again, things just changing social expectations about what's acceptable and what's considered normal there. So that's something. I mean, the Gen Xers have really just kind of soldiered on and got things done without too much fuss, and I think that's a marker of them as a generation. Yeah,
I like the way you call them the forgotten generation as well, because everyone does talk about Gen Ys or the baby boomers, but they are in there soldiering on, as you say. Getting it done.
And really being in those ages, generally in their 40s and 50s, a lot of them are our business leaders of today. So they are having that influence. They may not be getting the headlines and the coverage in the media, but a lot of them are actually really setting the direction of our businesses and our governments.
What letter of the alphabet did the younger generation get? Are they the Gen Zs?
So we've got, after Gen Y, we've got the Gen Zs. Yep. So really that's today's high school leavers or high school students, school leavers, university students. If you've got any kind of graduate employees, they're going to be Gen Zs too.
Yep.
So yeah, and again, they're different from the Gen Ys. The Gen Z marker is anyone born from 1995 to 2009.
Makes me feel so old.
Does it? Oh, yeah. And let's not get started on Generation Alpha, which comes after Gen Z, because we got to the end of the alphabet, Z, and then rather than going to A, it's Alpha, the first letter of the Greek alphabet. So yes, lots of chatter about the millennials and Gen Y, but actually the millennials are having children, and that's they have been for many years, and so that's Generation Alpha. So as social researchers, we do a lot of focus on what are the emerging trends and the future trends, and so naturally that leads us to looking at, well, who are the emerging generations, and what are their preferences, what's their outlook on life, and what therefore can we expect as they become the consumers of tomorrow. So there's certainly a lot we could talk about Gen Z, and they're the emerging generation of homeowners and occupiers, and their preferences are different to even the millennials and the ones who went before them.
Yeah. Do we have enough data on the Gen Zs and the style of living that they like? Are a lot of them still living with their parents because it's so hard for them to get into the property market?
Yeah, so that's all correct. So it is one of the biggest challenges they face is housing affordability. And over the last 4 decades, incomes have increased, but actually property prices have increased much, much higher. And depending on what capital city you look at, the differential is great regardless. But so that's a challenge. Their priorities are different. So again, those life stages or life markers, that progression that might have been happening in the past, where people, in their 20s started settling down and etc. Whereas today, so the Gen Zs, for example, they are prioritizing travel and seeing the world, and particularly not having been able to do that for the last 3 years, which for them is often a marker of social status. So I think, when was it that the first automobile came out? I think it was in the 60s, or Henry Ford. So that really marked that was a status symbol. If you had your own car, you had that independence. Whereas what we're seeing more and more for today's Gen Z is actually that's shifted from owning a car and being able to have that freedom to actually being able to travel the world and post the photos on social media. That's really your success marker, and a lot of them are choosing to do that at the expense of being able to add to their home deposit savings. So their priorities are different, and so they're saying, actually, I'd rather travel, I'd rather have those lifestyle adventures, maybe work overseas or work interstate for a few years, see the world, and that's setting them back in other areas, but they're willing to make that trade-off because that's what they value.
And the flip side of that, as well as Australia being the great country that it is, we'll have a lot of migration coming back into the country. Obviously, we've always got skilled migrants that we're looking for as well, but we also need seasonal workers at the same time too. Are we seeing any trends of people coming back to the state?
Yeah, to Western Australia specifically.
Yeah.
Well, this has been
the country in general.
Yeah. So the data we get through the ABS does lag behind there. So we're probably going to get a better picture of that in the coming months, as we've had really since earlier 2022 a lot more freedom with international travel. So that data will still be to come, but we've got enough hints that will be the case. I think what COVID showed us was, well, we had one of the biggest transformations to work in a century with the rapid uptake of working from home. Some people by choice and others forced to do it, saying you must work from home. You're not allowed to travel. So, and a lot of companies, they've realized, we can actually do this for professional services companies or office-based jobs. Those people might call them the knowledge economy jobs, where you're really, if you've got a computer and an internet connection, then you're able to really get your job, do the job.
Yep.
That's been a huge change. And so, I mean, COVID has been this catalyst because working from home there was people doing it pre-COVID, so it didn't start with COVID, but COVID has been like this, almost like a match, just lighting. There was already the gas there, and it's just been like this catalyst to going, wow, there's been an explosion of working from home, and that's had big implications in a lot of areas of life.
Mm-hmm. Well, that also impacts on where people choose to live as well, doesn't it? Because if they no longer have to commute to the CBD every day and they can work from home, are we seeing a change in the way that people choose to live and where they choose to live?
Well, I think you were reading my mind, Neil, because I just remembered, I was like, your previous question, that's where I was going with that, was saying that we've seen this kind of decoupling from where you work and where you need to live. And that's just totally changed the game and opened up opportunities. So coming back to international migration, well, in an era that's increasingly you can kind of work from home or work from anywhere, because more and more jobs are these knowledge economy jobs, and more companies are now employing these flexible working policies. It means that places that have those the great lifestyle, are a huge draw card. So places like Perth, Australia, we're really right up there.
We sure are. And what about... I'm going to touch back on the COVID thing again, because it has such a big impact on the way we live. So I heard somebody saying the way that they're living in Los Angeles and the Beverly Hills, and the CBD is actually in Los Angeles. It's not the most desirable place to live. It's actually in the hills because people are working. There's a lot of work from home already over there, and so people don't need to commute into the CBD. And there's a lot of homelessness and etc. down there. Do you think we'll see a trend like that in Perth, where places like Kalamunda and all them type places become the more in place to live? Are we seeing that trend already?
Well, I know my wife would love that. She loves the hills, but we are already seeing that in this. So really since 2020, when again COVID and this kind of decoupling of work, where you work and where you can live, we've already started seeing that. So some people have called it, we've seen the revival of the suburbs in Australia over the last 2 years, because you've got tens of thousands of people no longer commuting into the CBD. They're either working from home, and so if they're working from home, they're not going to the coffee shop in the city. They're actually going to their neighbourhood cafe in the morning for their 6 a.m, 7 a.m, 8 a.m. coffee. We've already started seeing that. More activity in the local neighbourhoods. People saying that actually COVID has really kind of been that reset for them to reassess what they prioritise. And people have thought, actually, why do I want to just slave away working my whole life and not really think about my lifestyle and how I'm living and my friendships? And so a lot more people have been prioritising their local community. So in some of the national research we've conducted in Australia through COVID, we've seen more people saying, actually, what I'm looking for now, more than I was previously, is a walkable community where I live. I value those relational connections, and so they're doing that. They're getting out in their neighbourhood. They're walking. They're using the local parks more. They're using their local coffee shops. They might even work from there for an hour or two if they've got, or meet someone there. So that's been a change since COVID, and it's, I think, for any suburban cafe or shopping malls, it's kind of breathed fresh life into them. And the flip side for the CBDs. Yeah,
it's that kind of supporting small business again, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. What do as property developers, what should we be looking out for now and moving into the future with the way that COVID has forced us to, work and live? Should we be building specific things into our houses, or should we be building a specific style of house?
Well, it's when we were talking to people through COVID, it's like whatever you can't have, it's what people want. So in COVID, we were all locked down in our homes. So people were saying, "Oh, I want a backyard. I want." So it's almost like the reversal of the trend that we were seeing to more high density. People saying, actually, now that I'm working from home and locked in a space, my 1-bedroom apartment doesn't seem as practical, particularly if I'm not allowed to go outside for like the 5-kilometre radius we had for a while. So I mean, obviously those restrictions have been relaxed now, but what we have seen is people wanting that the green space. So whether it's their own backyard or a communal neighbourhood park or a backyard or somewhere they can access, people are wanting that green space. They're more conscious of their lifestyle and their screen use. I think we've seen a lot more education around the negative impacts of screen time. And again, for most of today's workers, they're on a device all day for their job, so they're really thinking about those other factors too, whether they can have that in their home, like a property with a backyard, or a communal space somewhere nearby. So that is something we've seen for sure.
It's funny you say that, the amount of time we spend in front of screens right now. I actually counted the screens in my office alone, like in my office, not the office that's out there for everybody else. I had 2 screens, my laptop, my mobile phone and an iPad. All in one space. It's
scary, isn't it? But I think that's the case for so many of us. And so with every trend, we say there's a counter trend. So again, screen time usage is just trending up and up and up. But people are starting to say, well, actually, this is not good for us, and questioning both the physical and the mental impacts of that. And so there's been a pushback towards, green space. A lot of schools we work with are thinking about this in their design of their schools and their educational environments. But the same for housing. So, and the other thing is, in an era where more people are working from home, people are looking at, well, I need to have a good home office setup. And so, again, the wanting to turn that spare bedroom into an office or a study or something that could have a Zoom call that can be done kind of relatively uninterrupted. So that has been a change as well.
I'm going to touch back on the single-person households as well, because that's a big area of our focus. On the last ABS release, I think it was 26% of the population are single or lone-person households.
Yep, it's around that.
2.8 million people or something.
It's a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot of single people.
Yep.
And at the same time, we've got a housing shortage. And, we can get some of these single people, and not all of them will want to live like this, but we've also seen the social isolation and loneliness epidemic that you touched on in the stats as well. I think was it 30% of people have a mental health?
It's
problem?
that was the first time the census has recorded that that data. So mental health was came in as the most common kind of illness that people reported, or health condition.
Yeah.
So you're right that the social isolation, loneliness, these are growing challenges for this kind of digital age that we're living in. And when you add to that more and more people working from home, so you're not getting that kind of social interaction in the same way that you would when you're physically in an office, like you've got here in a space. So if people aren't getting that there's a gap, there's a hole there that they need to fill. So that's why we've been seeing people saying, actually, since COVID, I've really been prioritizing that sense of connection, relational connection and community, whether they get that from their own household or whether they get creative and actually maybe try to build those relationships with their neighbours, develop that sense of community. It's kind of an intrinsic human longing. And so in this increasingly digital age, there is a need there that people do want that relational connection and a way to combat that social isolation, which so easily happens in this kind of current world we're living.
Absolutely. And it kind of, the stats kind of married up together that the same percentage of single and lone person households was similar to the amount of people with a mental health issue. And I'd love to see the data when it comes back out, or the data when it comes back out in the future, to see if both of them trend in the same direction. Because there is a lot more support and help out there for people with these problems. But at the same time, we're also seeing the single person household trend in the same direction as well. With the data that we've got access to now, you said it's the fastest growing style of housing. Do we have a sort of a target or a forecast of where we're going to see that end up?
Well, I think, again, we can kind of get a glimpse, because Perth is often a few years behind, say, like Melbourne and Sydney in this regard. And, over the last decade, we've seen really that's been a big thing for, say, Sydney, for example, is those single-person households. So it's, if I was to try to predict what's coming, I would say that we're probably lagging behind that trend. So that's probably going to be trend over the next few years as well, unless we do something to change that. So yeah, there's those factors at play, whether it's the combination of housing inaffordability is at play there. Those kind of lifestyle factors of, again, people prioritizing their career or travel, and so setting back, say, maybe buying the house. So they're kind of trying to work out a solution that's maybe a scaled down version of what they might have envisaged previously. So there's a few factors at play there.
It's just as you were mentioning again there. It's interesting when you think about we've got less people that cannot get into the property market, and less people that don't want to commit to buying a property because they want to travel the world and do the things that want to do and have the freedom that they desire, which is fine, absolutely fine. But when you think about it, there's also a massive opportunity for investors to provide more rental stock, whether it's a HMO, whether it's a standard property, whether you buy an apartment. That's entirely up to them. But if you cannot see the trends that are happening right in front of you and see that as an investor, this is a massive opportunity to provide accommodation, but also make some money, which is why we invest in the first place. I just think it's, after speaking to you and hearing this, it's really given me more clarity as well of where this is going and where the opportunities are lying as well.
Well, that's a good insight, Neil. And the other thing to play into it is, particularly with the younger generations, their lifestyles are so much more mobile than, say, their parents or grandparents. So again, when it comes to, say, work, the average school leaver today, they're expected to have 18 different jobs across 6 different careers in their lifetime. So that idea of a job for life, which might have been, that's probably something they'll have to ask their grandparents about, because it would just be such a foreign concept.
You stayed in the same job all of your life.
I know, it's just such a foreign thing to today's uni students and graduates, and so that has knock-on impacts, because if you're changing jobs every 2, 3, 4 years, you might not always be able to find a job close to where you live, and you might be able to work from home either all the time or some of the time, but not every job's going to allow that. And so if you're changing jobs often, then you're going to have to find suitable accommodation. So again, there's some reasons there that younger people today might be more hesitant to really make these big financial commitments if their lifestyles are so transient. And so you can see there that there's reason for that hesitation to plonk down this huge mortgage.
At the same time that they're hesitant, the younger generation, for me, and this might be just me saying what I need to say, but I feel there's also a massive opportunity for them, because there's going to be a gap in the market where there's a lack of investment, because the baby boomers will retire, the Gen Ys will move into retirement, they'll potentially sell down their investments to fund the retirement, and if no one else is buying them, then there's going to be a mass gap there where someone needs to fill it, someone needs to provide accommodation.
Well, that's an astute comment, actually, and something that we've put out some research on this, the intergenerational wealth transfer, and exactly as you said, the asset-rich baby boomers are entering those twilight years and those retirement years, and will be passing on their wealth and their assets to various people, to family members, etc. And that's going to be, again, the baby boomer generation has been the largest numerically in recent history. They've got the largest kind of asset wealth and creation. So there's a lot there that's going to be transferred, and it's a question of where does that go, who does it go to, what are the opportunities that come. So, as Australia has trended over the last few decades, housing has been, if you can get into the market, it's generally been a pretty safe bet. So, like you said, for those who might be a bit of forward thinkers, young people, the ones who've been able to get in early have tended to be able to ride that asset increase. So, but it's a challenge, because for all those reasons we said earlier. Yeah.
And get the balance right of still being able to travel and do the things that they want to do. Grant, I could talk to you all day about this. It's a really interesting topic for me, and I didn't actually realise there was companies like yourself out there that collate all this data for companies like ourselves. So if anybody does want to reach out to yourself or anyone from McCrindle, how can they reach out?
Yeah, we've got a lot of resources on our website, mccrindle.com.au. There's plenty of resources there. We're also pretty active on LinkedIn, so people can search for McCrindle or me on LinkedIn and can connect that way. But anything to do with understanding trends, forecasting into the future, understanding social change. We love that stuff. It's data, it's people, and any way we can help, we really love to do that.
Fantastic. Grant, Dustin, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you stay up to date with all the cash flow positive property updates.